Hey everyone, this is Coach K coming to you live today on Facebook, and I will be sharing it with Twitter, LinkedIn, and hopefully Instagram and other social mediums like YouTube. Well, today we're going to go ahead and work on the curriculum Game Changers Championship, and this second textbook that we're working on is called Coaching, Evoking Excellence and Others by James Flattery. And I've already done the preface. We're going to work on the introduction, and hopefully we can develop a framework and infrastructure that will allow us to build nations and build families, build communities, and build our own self-governments and self-autonomy. My hope and prayer is that these lectures will help you in your world, help you in your daily life, and for those that are not able to get into college or get into some type of academy or some type of learning institution, my service learning institution will be a blessing to you, where I do my lectures virtually, and I give it as a teaching model so that you can duplicate it for yourself and for your communities. I grab excellent scholars as textbooks, and then I coach out of them. And I read the books because I feel that having a reader to read them is a blessing, but I don't have a reader, so I'm reading out of them myself, so that you can break down the construction of the language, whether it's a Western society language and thought, but you get a chance to kind of construct the identity of the person using the methods, so that it's like mathematics. You can see the breakdowns. You can see the way the framework is being built, and then you can adjust it and dismantle it as you see it fit and make it more accurate for your community, so more tailor fit. So let's begin. So here we have in the concept today of coaching and evoking excellence into others. We're going to start on page, let's see here. We left off on the preface, first section. So I'm going to finish up the preface. How to use this book. There are many different ways to read through this book. Some readers will start at the beginning and go all the way through, reading all the text, the charts, the summaries, the references, and the bibliographies. Others will just glance through and read the summaries at the beginning of each chapter. Some people will look through and read the charts and try to make sense of those. Still others will read the table of contents and the index, and then will make some conclusion about the book instead of doing what you habitually do when reading a book. Take some time to consider what it is that you want to accomplish by reading and working with this book, and then ask yourself, what is the best way to do that? Intervening in habits is very important in coaching, and you can begin to coach yourself by asking these questions. Each person, of course, will end up determining for himself what he does. The question remains, though, what is the basis for this action? Is it the most efficient and quickest way? Or is it a proven methodology that is continually measured against outcomes? Coaching, you see, is not telling people what to do. It's giving them a chance to examine what they are doing in the light of their intentions. So if they read this book looking for someone to tell you what to do, you won't find it. In any case, there is a particular organization to the book. Each chapter begins with a brief summary of its content, followed by the text. That is the theoretical basis for the topic. Following are reference notes and bibliography graphic information. The text is deliberately simple and straightforward. You'll find grounding for the ideas presented and references for further the study in the annotated bibliography. At the end of each chapter, you can use this book as a coaching tool if you allow yourself to use the distinctions presented as a way to look at your own world. What you will find will be useful or not according to what you are up to. On the other hand, try to think of exceptions to what's presented, or arguing with the book will leave you with what you already knew before you started. Yes, it does make sense to question and to struggle with a text, but dismissing it out of hand without a sincere attempt to take its notions into life will assure that we continue to remain only as capable as we are already. The book of coaching is in action, not in argumentation. Taking the book into action will give you a chance to assess its value to you, much more than arguing with it will. As a coach, you'll find yourself taking the same tact, asking your client, the person you're coaching, to take what you're saying into action as a test rather than arguing with you in an abstract way about the truth of what you're saying. Naturally, this takes trust. In a real life, this must be in place before coaching starts for you to get the most benefit out of this book. As a reader, you have to give it the benefit of the doubt. Now, I just want to start here by saying this. Even though you may not need to know about this author, you can see in their words, the way they chose the words, the way they attacked the structure of their sentences, what their intentions were in the tone, the style, the aesthetics, the aura of the energy, the ambience of the environment, how those words set itself up like shop. It built a house for you. And if you can tell this person doesn't like being argued, they think that you're dismissing information when you're arguing. Well, in fact, arguing, according to Socrates and Plato, you argue not to dismiss things. So for that person to say that don't dismiss it because you're arguing or showing resistance, it shows competition. Competition in sports did one thing or the other. If they weren't cheating, if they didn't do foul play, or they didn't do technicalities, most of the time competition did what? Sharpen the person to be more accurate, more efficient, more effective, faster, and more, enduring. So the competition was actually a good process. It wasn't a bad process if it was done correctly and accurately. So in the same sense, reading books is the same way. I like to tell people all the time, do not be afraid of skeptical people or people that argue with you, people that resist you. Fear is not enough information, not enough techniques, not enough tools, not enough resources. And that's where fear comes from. Being incapable of being satisfactory in the situation that you're in, that meets the challenge, meets the test meets the messes. So one of the ways you can resolve these conflicts is, a lot of times we don't have the resources, we don't have the strategies, we don't have the interventions, which is like the teams, the manpower, to be elevated over the circumstance. So a lot of times we work up under the circumstance. So it takes miracles like the grace of God or faith to kind of see through it, right? When you're reading textbooks from scholars who's done a lot of work in the field of research, which is compiling or, pulling together, collecting and gathering information, enough information that it can build a mathematical formula, which is theoretical framework or theories, right? Philosophy. And it should be mathematically sound through sampling, statistics, and the numbers. It's the numbers game, right? How many people do you sample? How many people? And a lot of times, you're getting now more scientists that is not going out and just asking for public opinion. Now you're getting scientists that's finally figured out you can use data, whether it's biased or discriminatory, to compile information, because it's going to be slanted no matter how you look at it, based on social economics, socialization, social location. So it's very important to have diversity of narratives, because people can see information differently based on like art. You ask someone to draw an apple, the apple comes out many different ways, because of different variables that goes into that perception. Even though they may see an apple the way everybody see an apple, the way they communicate that apple coming manifestation comes out totally different than what the apple looks like and how they see it. But the output is the issue, not the input. The output is the issue. The way we receive information may not be the problem. It's the way we communicate, the way we export it, or the way we digest it. And so a lot of times, arguing, being skeptical, being fearful, all of these elements that Socrates talks about is part of the process to arrive in a reasonable fashion to mathematics. So if you think of math, social math is saying that in order for equality mathematics to work, you have to have variables that equal out each other. So if you have 10 apples, you have 10 people, the apples have to weigh the same. It has to have the same nutrients. It has to have the same, healthiness versus the percentage of not healthiness, like if it has caramel on it or not, things of such, to be equal mathematics. It's called equality mathematics, the way I use it for social science or social behavior. You have to equal out the variables. So when you give it to 10 people, you have to pick the 10 people that has the same variable in regards to input of the apple. You can't give it to someone that's doing athletics that needs 2,000 to 4,000 calories versus a baby that probably just needs 400 to 600 calories. Whatever the case may be, it's still not variables that equal out. So this is what we go through in statistics that has a lot of scientists questioning statistics now more than ever on its social mathematics, because in the prior years we didn't have social mathematics. Now that we're understanding math on a spectrum, we see now math can be used in problem solving. Yes. Math can be used in conflict resolution. Yes. Math can even be used in social computation. So this is what social computation looks like. So when this author, this is what I do to all my textbooks. And so I'm showing you a technique so you can use it as well to help you in your life. This is the coaching side of this session. You can take that social computation and say, equal mathematics is, how is it supposed to be equal? And to rule out discrimination, to rule out bias, to rule out hegemony, to rule out heretics. You have to sit each component down and then measure it. And then you have to know the other component in measuring. So if you have a person, and this is why people say white culture, and then this is why people say black culture, because in social economics, you have to look at the history of culture. So if you go to the culture, you go into the history. That's called artifacts. Now, in the previous years, they used to just get 10 black people and then 10 white people and 10 Native American. See, you can use crayons. Blue people, red people, orange people, green people, okay? And put the cultures on those colors. And then they used to just count, what's your opinion? What's your opinion? What's your opinion? And then they will write it down. That was statistics. Now that we're in the future, we see that social computation, equality mathematics has to be variables that equal out. So you can't ask a black person and then think that all black people live in the same social economics, the same socialization, the same social background, history. So we learned that over the years. There's different social locations equals different adaptation systems and different government systems, different environmental injustice systems, different deviation, which is treatment under police brutality versus at-risk populations versus those that are not at risk. All of these things are getting ignored in statistics because the fact is they only measure the base or the basic fundamental component of a variable, not the micro component of the variable. So if you talk about it a little bit longer, you'll see that in mathematics, social mathematics, in order for sentencing to happen, this is a perfect example how to use it on socialization in criminal justice. It's a best example of social mathematics. Sentencing. People are saying that it's okay to have different sentencing in different states and different sentencing in different federal. But at this crime is the same, right? If you put the crime in measurements only, and then you put it in person to person, measuring circumstance to circumstance, you have a whole different ball game. And that's why there's injustice for certain cultures than others, because they don't use measurements properly. They use statistics without measurements on micro levels. They use it on macro levels, which is just a fundamental level, which if you look at white America, which they call it, European America. I don't know why they don't just say European America, because they are from Europe. On whatever country they're from, is still from their, first continent, and that's European. So Europe Americans, they have 3 variables, right? The first variable is if they were rich or poor or working class. That's the first variable. What is their social economics, right? That's the first one. The second is deviation. What was their childhood environments? What was the environment they were raised in, right? That's the second variable, okay? The third variable is how much environmental injustice, meaning police brutality. Like if you had hereditary for diseases, or, people always say, what was your, family, traits, blah, blah, blah. Doctors always ask you that. Same thing for socialization. What was the history of that community? Did they have did police kill anybody in their family the last 12, generations, right? Did they have any killers in their family the last 12 generations? Not that it counts in the crime, but it counts in the variables to measure sentencing. Because once you understand the crime, you understand whether it's malicious intent, premeditative intent, and that gives you an understanding of the background background construction of the crime, the construction of the engagement, the construction of the interaction, the construction of the decision making, right? The sentencing is based on privilege and power, usually in United States of America. It's not based on crime. And people say it is. There's 3,000 laws. We know it's not based on crime because there's 3,000 laws, and yet the second smallest population has over 60% imprisoned. So if they had their own community where they had no interaction, no obstacles, no what we call hostility environments, no environmental justice, the question is, will they have 60% in their imprisonments in their community? No, they would not. Because if you look at white America, European America, they have less than 30% in the prison system according to their population of community that is not hostile environments. So we know through the variables, looking at the micro, right, social computation, that if a culture has less than 30% in their makeup in their community, if they're privileged and in power, they have 30% imprisoned. That says that the system works for them to keep them out of prison. See, that is how we know there's injustice, because it's not about crime. It's about privilege and power, which is protection. So when you have a community that is not created for that community, you have people that are used to be the residents and members for the crime. So if you got a system that needs populations, you go outside of your population to get the members. You don't go inside of your population to get the members, because then mom and dad and Joe is upset with you. So that's called kinsmen. They talk a lot about European social economics through kinsmen, people that have kindred socialization. It's called relativity. Einstein talked about it. The laws of relativity doesn't just work on a physics level, it works on a chemistry level as well as a biology level, which is unfortunately he couldn't use that as a universal law. So when you're talking about the law of relativity, you're talking about the components that are relatable, and how those relatability variables adds up to protection, privilege, and power in mathematics, social mathematics. And that's how you get 30% incarcerated in the white population and 60% in the black population. Because the slaves that was brought over had no rights. So they're the most vulnerable population in the United States. So that means they still don't have any protection. Whereas the Native Americans were here, they had protection. This was their community. They know these lands. They know how to come in and out of the ecosystems. They know this is their home. Right? This is their house. They're the owners of this house. Even if somebody takes it from you, you know the house. You know it. You built it. You know everything in it. Well, African slaves, they came and built another house, and they know it as a slave with no rights, no privilege, no power. And then they pass that inheritance down to their generation and generation to their children. Now, their children may have money, but they serve as citizens with no rights, because you have a criminal justice system that sees them as what? Slaves with privilege, slaves with power that can be taken away. But then you look at whites, you have slave owners with privilege, slave owners with rights, slave owners with power. People say, I don't want to see it like that. That's not how it is. That's hogwash. But if you look at it, there's 3,000 laws. And you're trying to tell me that only 30% of European Americans sits in incarceration less than 3 years. They have less than 2% that sits in more than 3 years. And then on the other side, you have people in the other communities that serves more life sentences, more long service sentences to pay the bills of the system. With the same crimes, there are only certain crimes you can do. There is no exceedingly great crimes that can be variable. It's called equality mathematics. So if a white man did this crime and he gets 3 years, then why does a black man serve 15 years for the same crime? In a different state, it doesn't matter. It's the same crime because there's only 3,000 laws. So unless the law changes, their crime can't change. It's the same crime. It's like coloring with a green crayon. So you use a red crayon for a black population and green crayon for a European American, and that's why we have to dismantle the criminal justice system. Not because we have any personal, vendettas, because if we had personal vendettas, that can be taken care of. We don't need a system destroyed to take care of personal vendettas. You could do that easy through the food, system and through the water system. If you had a personal vendetta, right? If it's a personal vendetta, anybody can just go to a house and destroy the ecosystem. Because that's 3 ways to get into a personal vendetta: food, shelter, and clothing. That destroys and breaks down the health. And without health, you can't live. That's personal vendetta. Right? Institutional vendetta is destroying the institution, which is much harder to do because Native Americans would have done that a long time ago. If they could, institutional vendetta, they could have destroyed this whole colonization system if they could have. They tried and failed. Right? So here we are in the 21st century, and the writer of this book is saying, do not argue with the book, because your goal is to use the information to invent, to innovate. Pull the gems out of the book. Glean from it. And so this is what I'm saying to you. Argue with the book. If you don't see equality mathematics, argue with the book. That's where Socrates came in. And Plato and Einstein. The laws of relativity. That's arguing with the system. Not because you want to be discontented. You don't want to feel like people are like, oh, okay, you're being difficult. No, it's called equality mathematics. Okay, you got to have variables that equal out to make it equal. And a lot of socialization systems are claiming to be equality mathematics. It's called justice. You got to put a scale, and the rock got to be the same rock on the other side of the weight to have it as justice. And that's not the case. So why are we calling the criminal justice system justice if there is no equality that equals out when it comes to variables, especially with sentencing? We're going to talk about policing, right? We see this all the time. You can de-escalate with Joe and Bob, that's your buddies, but you can de-escalate when it's a stranger that you don't know. See, relativity works universally. So if you use the laws of relativity from Einstein in socialization, it would fit perfectly with policing. Okay? Policing is laws of relativity. They have relatable relationships with the people they interact with. People's like they're not telepathic, but nonverbal communication, kindred spirit, kinsmen, anything that's relatable, they won't kill. They won't aggress. They're relatable. They see it as a relationship, a trust already built. So they don't think that person will harm them. And it doesn't matter if they will or will not harm them. It's the relationship. It's the relativity factor. So policemen kills those that are not relatable to them. Period. They don't de-escalate anything that's not relatable to them. And that's what this book was just saying. If you can't relate to this book, try to at least, and then argue with it. And in real life, that's not the case. If you don't relate with it, you're not going to argue with it. You're going to escalate the situation until you feel comfortable. And that's what we see in policing. They're not doing crime justice. That's not it. There's only 3,000 laws in our society. That's it. That's not much. We got 7 billion people on this planet, and we got 300 million in the United States, and only 3,000 laws. What I'm trying to say is not that many variables according to the laws of our land. We got 3,000 laws that we can break. So that means when a police pull you over, you got 3,000 laws. He's going down to check. Check, 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 check. And if you don't check none of them, you should be able to go home safe. Having a bad attitude is not a law, right? Cussing at a police officer, they have created a law in their mind called resisting of arrest, because people not doing what they want them to do. That's called not being relatable. Relativity, the laws of relativity. So if they're not relating to you, or they don't want you to be relatable, that's called resistance of arrest. Misconduct, harassment, anything that says that you're not relatable. Now, that is now one of 3,000 laws. So why do people get killed? Because according to unrelatable crimes, it's misdemeanors. So now you got to add a component of violence to make it a federal crime or a felony. And then to make a kill chip, you got to make it a death for the officer if he felt he was going to get killed. That's what is called relatable. Laws of relativity is the mind, the psyche, how the mind perceives the incident to de-escalate and to escalate it. And that's why it's hegemony, heretics, and discrimination and bias, because it's based on a subjective rule. And that subjective rule is like a continuum, a spectrum. It moves back and forth like a continuum. And that is why it's fluid, because it's not justice anymore. It's subject ruling. Justice is gone. Justice left the building. Now it's one person to one person combat. Now it is a person that's afraid for his life, and if he's afraid for his life and they find out there's nothing to be afraid of, it's called mental illness. It's called phobia. It's called when you have distortion, mental distortion, paranoia. These are mental illnesses. So why is not police getting fined, charged, convicted for their mental illness? Because they're relatable, because it's a European American system. and it's been built on kinsmen relationships. They're family, and they see themselves as family because they're relatable. They came together as a family, and they built this country as a family. This is why it's problematic. This is why you have to coach people in their excellence naturally, not just as a business. I'm talking about coaching as a tool for conflict resolution. I'm talking about coaching as a mediation tool. I'm talking about coaching as a life tool to excel in life. So what happens now that you know as a coach? Behavior, people behavior, cultural behavior, traditions behavior, the way the infrastructure is made. It doesn't, okay, let's say people say, well, it's not black and white. It has nothing to do with complexion. It has to do with relationships, being relatable. So, if you meet a person that you don't know, what does a parent say to the kid? Stranger, what? Danger. They learn that at grade school, kindergarten, 4 years old, I don't know, toddler, as young as you can be. Stranger is dangerous. You don't think adults see that? You're not relatable. You're a stranger, therefore you're a danger. I don't care if you look as sweet as a cucumber. It's a mental perspective. So when you have power and you have the law, you do whatever you want with that mental perspective. You have no boundaries, no standards, and definitely no enforcement to make sure your mental perspective do not exceed efficiency and effectiveness. That's a problematic. And we still, to this day, after 400 years of African presence in this country as slaves, we still permit power structures to function outside of efficient and effectiveness because we play dumb. We play dead. So where do we go from here? People say, well, we coach. We don't coach. We educate. Okay? We petition. We protest. There's a difference. Coaching is different. Coaching is setting up a schedule, a routine, clinics, workshops. It's a regime, boot camp to make someone fit. It's not like once in a blue moon. It's a back to back until you see the manifestation of that muscle growing, building blocks and developing, maturing, and then you let it go. You micromanage it until it is not just showing manifestation, consistency, high performance. And then you monitor and observe for its existence of its life career. That's called coaching. We don't coach. We protest. We petition. We educate. We instruct. We don't coach. We don't even train. We coach. We don't even coach. We don't train. We're not personal trainers to white America. We don't micromanage white America. We don't micromanage the systems. We do not. We do not spend 24 hours, 7 days a week monitoring and observing the system. Remember, there's only 3,000 laws. Look it up. And if I'm wrong, so be it. But last time I checked, there's only 3,000 laws. There's probably 10,000, 20,000 little ordinances, like, you got to click your little light, stuff like that. And they do count those. They do the popular ones. But half of the world is just off the first 100. But learn those 3,000 laws. Learn the 10 to 20,000 ordinances if you want. But look at this is what we call statistics. Look at all the convictions. You're going to get a good 100, if that much. And then all the sentencing is within that 100. Half of those laws not even used, but they're there. Same thing with the ordinances. You got a good, strong 100 on both sides of the fence. Do you want our world to have increased quality care ethics, increased quality standards? You got to become the quality assurance. We got to start as a community to be the neighborhood watchers, to be the micromanagers, to be the coaches, to be the personal trainers of social ethics, of civil justice. Justice means equality mathematics. If you don't learn anything from this coaching session, learn justice is equality mathematics, right? They used to call it in the Bible eye for an eye, cheek for the cheek. That was, what for Christians and Hebrews and Judaism and Muslims, right? Islamic, and I think no, maybe it was for Confucius and Taoism. I can't remember, but it was pretty much universal, and it's changed a little bit because it was like, we're losing people we love. Because they had to do it for the people they love. They eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It didn't matter. That's how it was. But now it's not. It's more preferences and particulars and subject ruling and opinions and personal perspectives. And we can't even, and I just had written a book, we can't even do artificial intelligence because that is another level of hegemony, heretics, and discrimination and bias on a total different level. Because the programmers can, program their limitations, their blind sights, and their shortcomings. So don't let people tell you it's mathematically sound. It's only mathematically sound if they got enough information that is general and universal. Like they can go in as a math and program it as math, saying, hey, when you have a sentence of crime and one person and they can build it where it's 3 years across the board, then you throw out 50 million cases because they did 3 years more than the requirement, regardless if each state has like measure 11 or these exceptions to the rule. You throw them all out because the crime justice is equality variables. You got to equal out no matter what state. You can't create crimes that says this is one way and then build a law, right, that says it's another way. So if you have a crime and then you build a measure 11 law that says, well, we want to be hard on crime because this state wants to be hard on crime, but the whole world says there's 3 years. That's it for that crime. Then now you have an unjust law. Because justice says it has to equal out. One for all and all for one. Cheek for cheek. So now you can't build any laws that conflicts with the rest of the country and the state. That's called justice. Why have justice if every state is doing it differently? That's not justice. Or federal is doing it different. Justice is a unitarian system. Universal system. Welfare is supposed to be a universal system. Healthcare is supposed to be a universal system. Food supply is supposed to be a universal system. Right? One of these days, transportation and digital, technology and virtualization should be a universal system. The only system that should not be universal is the access, which is the assets. That should not be universal. Assets is extra stuff. Everybody should have a base, and then anything extra should be given according to whatever preferences. Right? Because not a lot of people want the responsibility of 50 acres. So why should they have 50 acres? Just because they're given privilege of 50 acres, unless they're going to put 50 families on there, They shouldn't be required to be responsible for 50 acres. That's why they had changed that, because they were giving people 50 acres and then having the responsibility. And some families was like, I don't want the responsibility of 50 acres. I just want responsibility of a half an acre. And they were okay with that. But then it looked like injustice because they wanted a half an acre and then somebody else wanted 50 acres and they had to have half an acre. And that's why it became all messy. But when they threw in that third element, see, it was okay with just the European element because they were coming from the same family. Now, people would say, no, that's not true, because you had the fugitives that came through that was running away from religious injustice, and then the prisoners that was running away from imprisonment in the Europe, because they believed in the crucifixion and brutality and cruelties, right? So they was running from these persecutions from their hometowns, right? So they came over in the Americas to get away and start a new life the way they wanted to build it, right? But what happened was, over time, they had to come together because of slavery, and because of Native Americans, they had to come together because they were unwanted. They was not welcome in the new land. And then when they had to buy the African slaves, because they didn't want to do the hard labor. So the hard labor became free labor by enslaving people and their babies and their children. And then Native Americans was like, you're not wanted in this land if you're going to be abusive and neglectful and spread diseases. You're being a parasite. You're not being a blessing. You're being a curse. You got to go. People that can stay here is the people that can work with us. So they had to come together. So all these groups that were like, okay, I am in my community a prisoner, a felon, and then another group said, well, I have a weird religion. So, and another group was like, hey, I'm an aristocrat, I'm elitist. They all had to come together because the new land they came in, they was like, you got to go. You got diseases, you got bad habits, and you're very abusive and neglectful. Most of y'all, you got to go. And then they got the African slaves so that they didn't have to do the work. So now they got two sides of the fence. African slaves, free labor, and then they had the Native Americans. You got to go. So that means war to take the land. So they became a family. So you had the French, you had the Dutch, you had the German, you had the Scottish, you had the Spaniards, and then you had the England, the British. They all had to come together and make something happen. So when you're talking about arguing, you're talking about defining micro versus macro. Well, this is Coach K. Hope this helped you guys out. Signing out. One love, much love, all love. Peace and blessings.